Dorks.
Hello and welcome to the CommanDorks. I'm Beef.
I'm Taryn, and we are back again with more fresh builds.
Today we're upping the ante and bringing you 2 partner decks, but not just partners.
That's right, partners plus a companion.
I believe that's called polyamory. Very popular these days.
I'm not sure that's the official Wizards term for it, but regardless, we're here to entertain and amaze, so let's just keep it moving and jump into showcasing Beef's Orzhov Infect Voltron deck, Bird Flu.
But before we begin, just want to mention that this video is being released in tandem with another video showcasing Taryn's partner and companion build of Jeska Vile Smasher with Obosh the Prey Piercer as companion. And trust me, it's one you don't want to miss. But without further ado, let's get into it. Bird Flu. This deck, it's been a labor of love for the last year, and it's gone through a lot of changes. So I'm excited to showcase it. But let's start off with our commanders. It's a partner pair of a bird and a horse. That's Francisco, Fowl Marauder, and Keleth, Sunmane Familiar. We'll start with Francisco. Francisco is a 0/1 legendary creature bird pirate for 1 and a black with flying. This creature can't block, and whenever 1 or more pirates deal damage to a player, Francisco explores. Now, exploring means that I reveal the top card of my library. If it's a land, I put the land into my hand. If it's not a land, I can leave it on top of the library or put it in the graveyard, and then Lurrus gets a +1/+1. The partner is Keleth. Keleth, Sunmane Familiar, is a legendary creature horse for 1 and a white with whenever a commander you control attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you can see where some of our synergies are coming in. These guys both going to be doing a lot of our Voltroning by putting counters on themselves and getting progressively bigger and deadlier as the game goes on. But they are not alone. They have the Lord of Death himself, Lurrus of the Dream Den. And Lurrus, being a companion, as you know, companions have the updated requirement that they are technically the 101st card for your commander deck, as long as you build your deck within their specific deck building requirements. In all companions cases, to put the companion from your sideboard into your hand, it requires you to spend 3 mana on one of your main phases, and you get to put it into your hand from your sideboard and then cast it afterwards. Lurrus' specific deck building restriction is that all of the permanent cards in my library have to be 2 CMC or less. Specifically our permanents. So instant sorceries, we're okay. We can have some bigger spells in those cases, but for the most part, we've got a very low CMC, low curve on this deck. And of course, Lurrus is a 1 and hybrid black-white for 2, so 3 total mana of either 1 white-white, 1 black-black, or 1 white-black, however you want to pay it, for a 3/2 lifelink cat nightmare creature. And it also says, once during each of your turns, you may cast a permanent spell with mana 2 or less from your graveyard. So, Lurrus is not central to the strategy, but it's a great backup piece for fixing a problem or getting something I need, or just a way to spend extra mana later in the game and get some extra spells off. But the pitch, it's bird flu. It started with a plague. Bird flu, they called it. But that was only the beginning of the end. The pale horse had begun his ride. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with plague, and with the beasts of the earth. Revelation 6:8. When I thought of this verse, in conjunction with the deck I'm about to showcase, I realized that this line from Revelation would make for a great thematic addition, and it only required me to make a couple of minor changes to stay entirely in line with that verse. And so, with this deck, we run 25 lands, as we have power over 1/4 of the earth, and we can take our opponents down with the sword, of Vorpal's sword, to be precise. We can cripple them with famine, via a few discard effects. And we can pummel them with Plague, using as much Infect, Toxic, and Proliferate as we can muster. And of course, with the Beasts of the Earth, a bird, a horse, and a cat will have to do. So, what are some of our key pieces in Bird Flu? Keeping it short and sweet, as I mentioned previously, the key, the way I'm trying to take people down. I want to use the sword, I want to use the plague, I want to use my beasts, and I want to use some famine as well to really bring everybody down, but all within a neat little package of 2 CMC or less for every permanent. And so the key pieces that kind of enable those include 3 big Infect pieces, are Phyresis, Glistening Oil, and Tainted Strike. These alone can knock players out of the game. If I get a big enough creature that has evasion, and I suddenly give them Infect, boom.
Game over, man.
Game over. Game over, man. As I mentioned as well, Vorpal Sword is effectively a key piece in this sort of scenario as well. Although Vorpal Sword is really only useful to me later game. Whereas Phyresis and Glistening Oil and Tainted Strike could have their place in an early turn if I just want to get the ball rolling with some Infect and do some work. But let's get into piloting. Piloting the deck. So for a starting hand, my goals are I want 2 lands. Ideally, I want to have black and white mana. I want to have some card draw and a little bit of ramp. Now, having 2 commanders in the command zone that I can be casting on turn 2 most of the time, hypothetically, my opening hand, if I start with 7, that's 9 cards in my hand. So I'm already way ahead. So I can afford to be in a pretty aggressive mulliganing. And that also is convenient because, again, I did mention I'm running pretty slim on the lands. Pretty slim for most people's tastes, but we can manage. So we can aggressively mulligan for a solid start without losing too much ground. And in best case scenario, we want some way to get Infect counters on each of our opponents early so that once we get access to a proliferation, we can start putting them immediately to good use. And from there, it's all about the Bird Flu and getting our opponents down with the sickness.
Sorry, couldn't resist.
That caught me off guard. That was great. So ramp pieces, we have a few here I'll mention. Classic Soul Ring, of course. Shocker. We're also running a Mox Amber because it's really great. Just when you've got a 2 CMC commander to be able to get that extra mana very early game, it's effectively another land. Dowsing Dagger is a house. It synergizes great with all the equipment I'm going in this deck. I don't know if I mentioned it specifically, but the deck's running 15 equipments and 4 auras, so it's definitely Voltron-y, but Dowsing Dagger is only an equipment for a very short while, and the rest of the game is going to be a land that taps for 3 mana. So yeah, get you a Dowsing Dagger. It's great. Another piece that synergizes really well with the Dowsing Dagger that's already been flipped is a brand new card from the Fallout crossover that I'm very excited to be playing. That's Pip-Boy 3000. Boy, does that synergize in every single possible way. But one of those ways includes that if you use its check map ability, when the equipped creature attacks, you can untap 2 lands. So it's some ramp as well.
Yikes.
That's just enabling another spell, maybe 2. You know, it's a powerhouse. A few more pieces that are actually ramping us. Explorer's Scope, another equipment that when the equipped creature attacks, you look at the top card of your library, and if it's a land card, you put it on the battlefield tapped. So very similar to Lurrus in that Lurrus is putting lands into my hand. Explorer's Scope is putting lands right on the battlefield, and they don't cut each other off. They're doing different things, and if I'm so lucky as to have my senseis top out early and I, have set it up correctly, I can get that land out and then get a land to hand as well, or put something that I don't want in the graveyard. It's a pretty fantastic little little piece. Cartographer's Hawk is a flyer, so it fit really well with the bird part of bird flu, and it's great for catch-up ramp. If it attacks a player that has more lands than you, you can return it to your hand, go get an plains. Doesn't even have to be a basic plains, just a plains, and put it on the battlefield, tapped and then shuffle. So it bounces itself, but it's going to be able to do that again before too long. Deep Gnome Terramancer is another catch-up ramp piece. That's really great in these colors and at this CMC. Lotho Corrupt Sheriff is great because I'm double spelling every turn, so it's going to be guaranteed I'm making myself treasures. And as long as you're making yourself treasures, everything everyone else does is gravy. It doesn't matter at that point. So that's just
take me to Value Town.
Value Town, absolutely. And then also worth mentioning, I'm running an Ornithopter of Paradise. Again, a flyer, and it taps for mana. So it could hold a sword. It could hold a Vorpal sword late game. You know, it's evasive, and that's one of the things I was really focusing on during the deck building, was that I wanted to get a lot of flyers. I wanted to get a lot of evasion. The bird flu needs to get through. We gotta keep this plague spread. All right, card draw. Quite a few card draw pieces in here, as you would imagine. Lurrus really opens up a lot of... It's a challenge, but it also gives you a lot of opportunities. Because you're able to be double spelling, you are able to dump your hand pretty quickly. But that also means you need to refill it pretty consistently. So we've got a lot of card draw options. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. Call of the Ring is a great piece that... It's got some additional stuff. The ring is tempting you. So there's the whole ring tempts you aspect where you can make a creature your ring bearer. It's going to give it some other abilities like evasion and extra damage. And if it were blocked, the creature that blocks it dies. Those are all great. What I'm really caring about, though, is the fact that at your upkeep, once you name a creature your ring bearer, you can pay 2 life and then draw an extra card. So that's huge. Paying the life especially is great because we got to go fast. We don't mind spending some of our life for some extra card draw. Dawn of a New Age is a great piece. Just a 2-drop enchantment, enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. And then at the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter. And if you do, draw a card. And then when it has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it and gain 4 life. So I love that sacrifice clause because now I can get it back with Lurrus later if I need to. So it's just going to continue to... It's great when you've got a big board state, putting that down and knowing that, hey, even if they wipe me, I'm getting extra card draw for the next several turns. That's security right there. That's a good feeling. Pip-Boy 3000 I mentioned earlier, one of its abilities says when this creature attacks, you can draw a card, discard a card. Synergize is great. Zephyr Boots, very similar. Equipped creature has flying, bird flu. Equipped creature, when it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card and discard a card. Again, we're digging, we're getting stuff in our hand, fresh cards in our hand, we're putting stuff we don't need immediately in the graveyard, where Lurrus is going to get it back for us if we want it later. Just the churn, we want to keep digging. Infectious Inquiry, great synergistic piece. I'm going to be mentioning it several other times throughout the deck showcase here, but Infectious Inquiry says... for 2 and a black mana, this sorcery, you draw 2 and lose 2, and then each opponent gets a poison counter. Great way to start the game. That is 10% death for our opponents. They only need 10 poison counters, folks. So every single one counts. Siphon Mind is another black card draw effect. This time it's a discard effect. So a little bit of our famine, I should say. So it says each of our opponents will discard a card, and then we draw a card for each opponent discarded. For each card discarded this way. Ambitious Farmhand, I consider card draw because it ETBs and it puts basic plains into your hand. So it's making sure I hit those land drops, which is clutch, really clutch when you've got 25 lands. And again, I'll talk about this again. 25 lands is great because you don't want to get flooded in this deck. Getting flooded means death. You stop casting spells. Sitting with a bunch of lands in your hand, it's game over. So having cards like the Ambitious Farmhand to just go grab one for us immediately is huge. An Archivist of Ogma is card draw. It says whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. The Dark Confidant, classic, Bob. He's 2 mana for a 2/1 creature that says beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Put that card in your hand and you lose life equal to its CMC. Well, most of my deck is 2 or less, so that doesn't hurt me very much. That feels pretty good. And very similar to Dark Confidant is my favorite, Keen Duelist, who is a political Bob. I love him. He says at the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player, and then you put those cards that were revealed into your hands.
How many decks do you run that in? It's like any deck
Almost
with black.
every deck that I can. I picked up like 2 play sets of that card when it first dropped because I was like, does nobody else see how amazing this is?
It's
and I
good.
love the politics. It's so good. And you can make friends. I love the opportunity to make a friend at the table. It's like, oh, you need a card? Like, here, let me give it to you. And then next time they're thinking about who do I swing at? Well, Beef might give me a card next turn. Do I really want to turn that down? I mean, it's all those little subtle opportunities for influencing that I really love in Commander. So yes, Keen Duelist, a new ad that I'm still kind of testing, but I threw in Mr. Gutsy from Fallout. He's a 2-drop artifact creature robot soldier. It says whenever you cast an aura or equipment spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mr. Gutsy. And when Mr. Gutsy dies, create X junk tokens, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters. Well, we've got a lot of +1/+1 counter synergy in the deck already, so that's great. It's one more creature that's getting counters that could potentially get moved over to my Ozolith and then dumped on a commander later. But what does a junk token do? You might be asking. Junk tokens. It's an artifact. It's an artifact with an ability of tap, sack this artifact, and then exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Activate only as a sorcery.
Okay, Impulse Draw.
Impulse Draw, exactly. Not really what I'm trying to do for the most part, but again, when my CMCs are this low, if I've got 5-6 mana, like, who cares? I'm going to be able to cast whatever I reveal anyway, so it's going to work out. And those can do some work. A couple more pieces. I'm also running Pure Steel Paladin, a classic in any deck running a lot of equipment. Whenever an equipment enters the battlefield that you control, you may draw a card. And it also says equipment you control have equipped 0 as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. So it does a lot of work in an equipment deck, does a lot of work in this deck, and that card draw is nothing to sneeze at. And the last piece that's also effectively some card draw that I'll just mention, the backside of Shale, Dean of Radiance, Shale, is Embros, Dean of Shadow. He's a 4-drop, but because the front side is 2, I can put him in the deck. He has an ability of tap, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature, synergy, and then Embros deals 2 damage to that creature. And he has a second ability that says, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. So, kind of a nice little piece. Not always super relevant, but it's nice to have an option. Some removal. Let's get into removal. First one, we'll go through some creatures first. I've got a Dauntless Dismantler, the great little treasure hate piece that's been getting some play recently. It says it's a 1/4 for 2. Great stats, great big hindquarters to block anything dangerous. When it enters the battlefield, artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. And it's also got an ability of XX white. You can sacrifice it and destroy each artifact with mana value X. So just a great way for some targeted but wide removal, potentially, if I need to. And just for
gotta run that treasure hate, right?
Yeah, and 1 white mana, destroy all artifact tokens is not nothing. That can be pretty huge. Yeah. Few more removal pieces. Lion Sash, great synergy piece. It's an equipment creature that puts counters on itself. I mean, what more could you ask for? I guess you can ask for the fact that it lets you exile specific targets from graveyards. So that's another cat for the beasts of the earth, hopefully to take an opponent down. Hopeful Initiate is another great piece that also has synergy with counters. It's a 1/2 for 1 white. It has Training, which is whenever this creature attacks each other with another creature with greater power, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And it has an activated ability of pay 2 and a white, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. So it doesn't just have to be him, which is awesome. And then destroy target artifact or enchantment. So some targeted removal on a body that puts counters on itself. Perfect. We're running Umezawa's Jitte. Great. Really great piece of removal that people kind of forget is removal and can be sneaky. It gets a few counters on there. Even if the creature dies, it can still just flop its Jitte self across the room and stab somebody, which is a very convenient little sneak attack from an equipment there. It's got some other abilities that are pretty relevant at other points as well. But,
plus proliferating those counters on it too.
You're speaking my language. That's the fun of the whole deck, is that I'm doing all the synergy with equipment and synergy with Infect and proliferation, and there's lots of things that can be proliferated as well, not just my opponent's poison. Collective Effort is a great removal piece. It's a sorcery for 1 and 2 white. It's got it has an escalate ability, which means that you can choose one, and you can choose more if you tap an untapped creature for each escalation, in addition to its original cost. The 3 abilities being destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Great. Destroy target enchantment. And the last ability, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Speaks for itself. Drownin' Ichor is a removal piece that is perfect for the deck specifically because it's got Proliferate tagged on there, but it also says target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. So a targeted removal that could get around an indestructible maybe, but specifically the fact that it also says Proliferate is key. Phyresis Outbreak it requires a little setup. Ideally I want my opponents to have 3, 4, 5 poison counters before I cast this, but it says each opponent gets a poison counter, and then each creature gets -X/-X, where X is the number of poison counters its controller has. So it's a potentially one-sided board wipe that's also getting those Infect counters out there.
Yep, and it's specifically opponents, so even if you, through some weird thing, get a poison counter, it's not going to hurt you.
It can happen.
So,
it can happen.
yeah.
I've definitely seen people try and steal an infectious bird and swing it at me. So yeah, the fact that it's not gonna harm me is great. Winds of Abandon is a great one-sided exile creature wipe in white. It's kind of a white Cyclonic Rift, except that it's just the creatures, but it's huge. One little synergy piece I gotta mention that I love with that one is that if I happen to have Archivist of Ogma on the battlefield when I cast it overloaded, each of the creatures being exiled becomes a search the library basic land effect. I've done a wipe of like 6, 7, 8 creatures, and then all of a sudden I'm drawing those cards too. I mean, it's great. Jeez. Nobody sees that one. Sees that coming. So we go Winds of Abandon. Asterian's Thirst is a great instant speed targeted exile piece for 3 and a black. It says put +1/+1 counters on a commander you control, where X is the power of the exiled creature. That thing can win games. If they think, oh, I've got my great big blocking flying creature that you're not going to get your little infectious bird through, and now your blocker's gone and my guy is deadly. And it's game over. Path to Exile, pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. I specifically run Path because, again, it works great when you've got Archivist of Ogma and Deep Gnome Terramancer. Those get triggered off of your own Path to Exile because you're making your opponent search their library, and you're making your opponent ramp a land. So it's a good piece there. And then finally, removal piece that also synergizes great is Vraska's Fall. Is an edict effect, says each opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison count. Recursion piece, I'm really only running 2 in the deck. That's because for the most part, where Lurrus can do most of it. If I need anything recurred, Lurrus is probably going to be recurring it. The only other piece that I'm running, aside from Lurrus, is that I'm running Sivin's Reclamation. And Sivin's is great because Sivin's could also potentially get back Lurrus, if need be. Protection pieces, running several here. First, Classic, we're running Mom, we're running Mother of Runes. You know her, you love her. Tap, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice till end of turn. That can get my commander in make him unblockable. It can also save them from targeted removal. It's huge. Very similar to Mom, and even more synergistic is Skrelv, Deflector Might. Very similar in that it's got an ability of pay 1 Phyrexian mana, tap, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So again, it can get you through unblocked, it can protect you from targeted removal, and it's given that Toxic, so really good.
That's almost better in some ways.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's great. We're running Blacksmith Skill, which is a single target protection. Great for saving a bird from something nasty. It says target permanent gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And if it's an artifact creature, it also gets +2/+2 until end of turn. But I'm not too concerned about that. The hexproof and indestructible are enough. Clever Concealment is a classic that I run in a couple decks now. For 4, 2 and 2 white. It's an instant speed. Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out, and it has Convoke, which means you can tap creatures you control, untapped creatures, to pay for part of the mana cost. And boy, I mean, in a Voltron deck, phasing out is everything. Like, being able to save my equipment and my enchantment, like my auras, all that stuff from exile or anything. I mean, huge, keeps you in the game. Galadriel's Dismissal. Boy, I love this new card. Another one from Lord of the Rings. I think from one of the Commander decks specifically. It's an instant speed for 1 white. Target creature phases out. It's got a kicker though for 2 and a white. You can pay as an additional cost. If the spell was kicked, each creature target player controls phases out instead.
Oh man.
So
good.
this is multifunctional. This is board protection. This is blocker removal. This is a fog. If your opponents are attacking with a great big board state and you just phase them out, and now they've got no blockers for you to just swing in. I mean, it's a blowout. No matter how you use it, I love this thing.
That's interesting. When it's kicked, the target goes from being a creature to a player. So that's specifically target creature phases out. If it was kicked, each creature target player controls phases out instead. Changes the target.
So, great, very good piece. I've used that to great effect as well. Teferi's Protection, also pretty obvious, but also does the same thing as the last two, basically, at least on the protection side, and
just a little more efficiently.
Yeah, a little more efficiently. Grand Abolisher. Don't stop me now. Grand Abolisher's ability says that during your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifact creatures and enchantments. That's the bulk of what's going to be activated on your turn. And when you're dealing with Infect and swinging for very deadly swings, people like to wait until your turn to try and interact with that. So preventing that sort of interaction is very important. So we can't just leave it at just Grand Abolisher. We also have a Conqueror's Flail in here as well, which effectively does the same thing. It just says that as long as this... it says equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. So at most it's going to be 2 in this deck. But it also says as long as it's attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So really allows my turns to be my turns and nobody else's. We're also running the Lava Spur Boots, a brand new equipment that I like specifically because Francisco's got 0 power. So an equipment that can equip for 1, give him +1/+0, haste, and ward 1. That's a no-brainer. So I'm excited to try that one out. I haven't gotten to play with it too much yet. The Ozolith is, I consider effectively protection. It's protecting my counters. So even if my commanders get removed, the work that they've done, accruing those counters, doesn't have to go away necessarily. And I can throw those right back onto them as soon as I get them recast. Great piece. I don't need to have it every game, but boy am I glad when I do. the equipment can be enough that if I can come back even if I lose my counters, but not having to, that's great. Kaya's Ghost Form is protection in that it says when the enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. So that's great. Another one that's pretty similar is Necrogen Communion. Enchant creature you control, enchanted creature has Toxic too. That's pretty synergistic. And whenever the enchanted creature dies, return that creature to the battlefield under your control. So that's great. Doing double duty, some recursion, some infect. Love that. Let's see, another protection piece that I just added and haven't gotten to play with yet, but it's a land from Fallout. It's Diamond City. Diamond City enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. It taps for 1 colorless, and then it has another ability, tap, move a shield counter from Diamond City onto target creature. Activate only if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield on this really... turn. I'm putting 2 creatures on the battlefield pretty frequently, so it's not too hard to get that off. I don't necessarily want to use that ability right away, because if I manage to proliferate,
more
shield counter. So I can, as long as I get that first shield counter proliferated, now I can put that on another creature, and there's still one there waiting to be proliferated again. So I can just set up a shield factory and start protecting things if I get everything lined up. Invasion of Goba Khan is a great piece. It's a battle. You don't get to see. I don't see a lot of battles out there, but I've been playing with a few of them just to try and get a feel for them. The battle side kind of fits into our famine in that it's when it enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it. As long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it, but it costs 2 more to cast. So I'm getting something. I'm going to look at their hand. I'm going to get the biggest problem out of their hand and making it more expensive to cast. It's got 3 battle counters, whatever they call those on battles. So it's pretty easy for me to get it down and then pop it immediately with one of my commanders, because the backside is where I really have a lot of fun. It says at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn. Well, what do you know? That seems pretty thematic. It says you can sacrifice the Light Shield Array, and creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So, boy, is that a great piece that just synergizes and hits on every single facet of the game that I'm trying to achieve in here. So, really, really like Invasion of Goba Khan in this deck, and it has put in work. Agent of the Shadow Thieves. It's an enchantment. It's a background. It says if a commander you control attacks the opponent with the most life, it gets a +1/+1 counter and gains Death Touch and Indestructible till end of turn. So it's going to guarantee that my horse can get through, even if it doesn't have evasion yet. It's going to make sure they're getting additional counters, and they're not going to be dying, and nothing is going to block it either. So great piece for the deck. I'm just going to mention one utility piece here. That's kind of probably my best discard piece in the deck, is Una's Blackguard. Una's Blackguard synergizes pretty well because it's a flyer. And it's not just a flyer, it's a 1/1 flyer that says each other rogue creature you control comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. That's nice. Not a lot of rogues in the deck. But the real kicker, it says whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Ooh, famine hits home. Not one that my opponents like to see, but does. I find that at a certain point, you should be less concerned with drawing cards and more concerned with stopping your opponents from doing things with their cards in this deck. So that does a pretty good job there. Mana base. Francisco does a lot of work on the mana base front. He digs deeper, puts lands in our hand, which is pretty important. We're running 25 lands, which is a new record for me, but it's definitely viable here. So the pieces that help with that: Ambitious Farmhand, ETB grabs the basic planes, Cartographer's Hawk, Catch-Up Ramp on a bird, Deep Gnome Terramancer, Catch-Up Ramp, Dune Mover, ETB puts a basic land on top of your library. Again, great to do that first main, knowing that Francisco's going to be hitting and revealing a land right off the top, so that I'm getting my land guaranteed. That's card draw, that's mana, that's everything. Dowsing Dagger is part of our mana base too. Effectively, it's an equipment that's going to be become a land that taps for 3, and Explorer's Scope, as I mentioned earlier as well. As far as multi-purpose cards, I just mentioned a couple tutors. I'm running Open the Armory, which is great. It's run it. It can tutor for one of the 15 equipment or 4 aura enchantments that I'm running in the deck. And then Enlightened Tutor, pretty similar. You can grab all those that I just mentioned, plus a few more, because the deck is running a total of 19 artifacts and 8 enchantments, plus, of course, there's artifact creatures that I'm not accounting for. So that's over a third of the deck, I think, can be grabbed by Enlightened Tutor and can be pretty clutch at the right moment. So Synergy's combos. I'm just going to list off the pieces that really tie into our Toxic Infect Proliferate strategy. Blightbelly Rat, one of our Beasts of the Earth, has Toxic 1, plus a death trigger to proliferate. Dune Mover has a Toxic 1 on it. Pestilent Siphoner is a Toxic 1 flyer, 1/1. Again, Bird Flu. Grateful Apparition, a flyer, Bird Flu, that proliferates on dealing combat damage to a player. Martyr for the Cause is another creature that has a death trigger proliferate. Plague Stinger is a flying Infect 1/1 for 1 and a black. Swamp Mosquito is a flying 0/1 that says when it's not blocked, defending player gets a poison counter. Infectious Inquiry, I mentioned earlier, was the I draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, you all get a poison counter. Phyresis Outbreak is the each opponent gets a poison counter, and then all their creatures get -X, where all X is the number of poison counters that they have. Vraska's Fall is the each opponent sacks a creature or a planeswalker and gets a poison counter. Unbounded Potential, which is an instant speed spell that can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and or if you want to entwine it for an extra 4 to proliferate. So proliferating for 2 mana. Tainted Strike, it's classic, really nasty, really nasty. If you, for example, if somebody's swinging with a big creature against one of your opponents and it's going to get through, let's just give it an effect and take that person out. They didn't mean to do it, but it happens. Prosthetic Injector is an equipment that synergizes pretty well here as well. It's an equipment for 1 that equips for 1. It says equipped creature gets +0/+2 and has Infect 1. Again, every single one is relevant, especially when it comes to getting that initial counter on each of my opponents, just so we can just get that proliferation train rolling. And speaking of proliferation train, we've got 2 pieces that really synergize with that. That's a Contagion Clasp, which enters the battlefield. You put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and it's got an activated ability of pay 4, tap, proliferate. Very similar is the land Karn's Bastion.
That is the biggest terrorist in the big cat industry right now.
I can't see Karn's Bastion without immediately thinking of Tiger King. That man poisoned my brain for life. But Karn's Bastion is a land that taps for colorless mana, and it also has the ability pay 4, tap, proliferate. So weaknesses, challenges. Yeah, as I said, you got to keep the churn going. It's a deck where, as long as you've got cards, you're doing just fine. You just don't want to get cut off of your digging and your card draw. One thing Tara and I were discussing, that really the other challenge for the deck is that Graveyard Exile can really hurt. But thankfully, Lurrus, the way I've built it, is that Lurrus is really just for value and give you something to do, and with extra mana late game. But I'm not relying super heavily on Lurrus. He's just along for the ride. He's here for the apocalypse, and he's going to have a good time. So if I lose my graveyard, that's just how it goes. But that's Bird Flu, man. Boy, I can't wait to show these decks off. This is one of my favorite decks I think I've built in a long time, and I've been pretty obsessed with it for a long time. Those of us in our pod can attest that they've seen this deck and faced it many a time. So